Who we are and how we are is something that's always in flux. We often tend to think in black and white, which means that if we label ourselves one way, we would think what is the opposite of that thing, and we would then exclude ourselves from being that way. Let's say you thought, I'm quite irritable. You'd probably say, well, irritable people are also not very kind, they're not very nice, so therefore I'm not nice, I'm not a nice person, or I'm not very caring. You take the meaning of a word, label yourself that way, and then infer through the labeling, not just that you are the way you've labeled yourself, but you also are not. The various different things that you feel oppose the meaning of that thing that you've labeled yourself as being. Often it's actually more difficult to think about what are the implications of me being that way. So that almost is more difficult to accept, because I guess it's more full of ambiguity and possibility in terms of, well, what does that say about me? You think I'm irritable. There could be a million things that you also think oppose being irritable, and you're labeling yourself as none of those things. In psychology, we think of what's known as black and white thinking, which is a way of thinking that can be very unhelpful and can cause us a lot of problems in our self-view and self-compassion. There's a lot of nuance in who we are, and I want to encourage nuanced thinking in you. Nuance is like, there's complexity, there's different sides of things, there's detail, and you could say almost it's like there's a lot of color in who we are. Like, if you were to think in terms of colors, labeling yourself as a color, you're the whole spectrum of the rainbow, aren't you? You're the whole spectrum of light. You're different shades, of color, different shades of you, different shades of being a human being. So you can be, a person who can at times be irritable, or a person who can at times be very caring and understanding and non-judgmental and kind. They don't all have to be oppositional ways of thinking. You don't need to say, if I am one thing, I'm therefore not this other thing. That's a bit of a fallacy, isn't it? It makes sense, but it isn't true. So it makes sense to label yourself one way and then assume you are the opposite of all the meanings of that word. But in reality, you can be all the different shades and tones of who you are. And some of these things may appear to be contradictory, and I think that's just reflective of the simplistic way human beings think. Daniel Kahneman talks about heuristics, which are kind of like rules for living, rules for thinking. Kind of like our brain is set up to run certain programs or algorithms that have certain rules built into them to make things simpler for us in our thinking. But in reality, we have quite a complicated ability to think. Our thinking can be very complicated and nuanced. So that was one thought I was having. The second thought then, as I was out for my walk this afternoon, was that, there's no single color that represents autumn. You may think, oh, it's orange. It's very orange in autumn, isn't it? If you go out and look at the trees in autumn, as I've done on this walk, you'll see that the colors are extremely variant, and they are on a gradient as well. There's not just orange, there's not just green, there's not just brown. There's no single color that represents a woodland. And there's no single label that represents you. And many of these labels that you might put on yourself might seem to be contradictory, but if you're realistic about who you really are and how you really are, you're all of those things. That appearance of contradictoriness is a simplification resultant of your way of thinking. Your brain's need, or your brain's evolved tendency to think in simplified ways. So, you might think I'm coming across as rambling a little bit, and that's because it's kind of hard to actually go through the thinking process to explain what I think we do understand on a deeper level. So we think in simplistic ways in general, but I believe that we understand that simplicity is not actually reflective of reality. Another conversation that I was having today at work was about, the universe, how big the universe is. It's so incredibly vast. We were saying there must be life out there, and that vastness and complexity is representative of the vastness and complexity of a human being as well. We are so much. And also, to be a human being is to be in relationship to all other beings and to all of existence, really. I'm getting philosophical now, you can see that. But it's a lovely sunset and I'm getting into the flow of it now. So, yeah, to be a human being is to be part of the entire complexity of the universe. So let's not simplify ourselves too much. It's fine to think in simplistic terms. Sometimes it's helpful for the brain. But Daniel Kahneman calls that fast thinking, system one thinking, which means there's a system in our brain that just wants to make snap judgments, wants to make quick decisions. But that system is full of biases and flaws and inaccuracies. And if we actually take the time to think and to understand the various different ways of who we are and be honest, accept that you're not perfect, that there's little things about yourself that you don't like. If you've got high standards and you're a perfectionist and you beat yourself up all the time over not being perfect in this way and that way at all moments of your life, you let go of that. You need to recognize that that's okay, that it's okay to be imperfect, to have multiple different sides, and to advocate to yourself for the nuance of who you are and how you are, as a human being. So, a bit of a ramble, but I think I got there. So, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.